First, we're going to start out with basic value scales. So I drew value scales of 10 for each type of material and technique that we are doing. I'm starting off here with stippling. Essentially, stippling is a collection of small dots or points or kind of like maybe tick hatches. The results can be very satisfying at the end, but it does take a long time, and it is a technique that requires a lot of patience on the artist's part. Some of the students that I've worked with in the past really enjoy stippling. They think it's therapeutic, and the buildup of values to create a picture just by using dots is very enjoying to some people. So you can see here in this value scale, it's taking me a long time to fill in the black because I'm essentially trying to cover up all of the white paper by using a collection of dots. And then as I go down the value scale towards the mid value in the white, I am just using less dots in the area so the white of the paper shines through. I go back and forth a lot in my value scales. So since value is relative, I'm always adjusting the values on my value scales so I know that I get it all. The darks obviously take the longest to do, and then once you get to the light values, it's a lot simpler because you're using a lot less dark, so there's more white of the paper shining through and less of the dark, creating that illusion of a gray or a white or a black. So the most common material used with stippling is a micron pen. They come in assortment of different sizes. I can only find my teeny tiny micron pen, 0.30 millimeter line width, and eventually I found my larger micron pen. But essentially, the tips of the pens are almost kind of like a felt, and they range in a different variation of sizes, but they're all pretty small for the most part. They are all smaller than an average pen tip. But they're really nice they glide along the paper very smoothly. They're really nice to write and draw with. You can actually do stippling with any kind of material if you want to. You can do it with paint and paintbrushes, ink and ink brushes, calligraphy brushes with ink. You can do it with graphite pencil. You can do it with any of the objects we're using here, so pen, crayons. It just depends on how precise you want your dots to be and how small you want to be able to make them. So next up, we're doing cross-hatching, and for this cross-hatching method, I'm just using a regular house pen. And you can see here I'm starting with vertical lines, and I'm really trying to fill those in so the white of the paper isn't shining, and then I overlap the vertical lines with horizontal lines, literally making a weave pattern and a hatch over top of each other. And I do this for every value. Again, same as the stippling, I let more and more of the white shine through the marks, so I leave more space between the marks as I go down to the light value on the value scale. And again, you can use any type of material with this method. Now I'm doing scumbling and graphite, and scumbling is basically kind of like circular movements, and you can build up layering with it. And again, just letting the white of the paper shine through as I go down the value scale. But you can also use line weight and hand pressure to create more values between the lights and the darks in this method too with the graphite. You can really do it with any of these actually, except for maybe the stippling. That one would be a little bit harder to do, but if you wanted to play around also with line weight, you can do that. For these value scales, I was really trying to keep my line weight and my pressure, my hand pressure, pretty equal, just so you guys could see how to use the paper and the light of the paper shining through the dark of the marks to create the value scales. And then if you add hand pressure on top of that, that will emphasize that shift in value even more. Then the last one I did is hatching. And hatching is just, instead of cross hatching and going in two different directions, you just make a linear mark, either a vertical linear mark or a horizontal linear mark, just in one direction. So first thing I want to go over, because I didn't do it before, is how to sharpen your pencils. I know that a lot of you guys were drawing with like your blocks and stuff, and I think especially for big drawings and like large areas of value, that's really good to do. But whenever you're getting into details, you might want to work with your pencils more. So whenever you're working with your pencils, obviously they get dull over time. And you can't really sharpen these pencils in a pencil sharpener, or the charcoal will just get like crushed. So what you want are a few different tools to sharpen. You want some kind of razor blade, and then maybe like a razor blade apparatus so you don't cut yourself, or like you can use just a razor blade. I actually sharpened this one with just a razor blade. And then you can also use sandpaper. So for the razor blade, let me get a piece of charcoal. So I have my white charcoal here. For the razor blade, you want to kind of start at the back and like whittle away the wooded area of the charcoal to the charcoal to make a nice fine point. And I would take away a decent amount so you have more charcoal exposed. Obviously do this in an area because that you don't mind getting dirty or over a trash can, because the charcoal and the shavings are gonna just spread everywhere. And then you can keep whittling away the actual charcoal until it gets to a point, a nice tip. So that's kind of how I do mine when I work in charcoal. Get rid of some of these shavings. Just have to sweep later. And then there's sandpaper too. So this is essentially sandpaper. This came in a little pack thing that I bought. And for this, you can, sharpen the edges by rotating your pencil and on the sandpaper, so that texture kind of like grids down some of the edge. And you can see here that you get a nice crisp point with both of those techniques. So as always, I suggest you guys start with doing a value scale. So this is toned paper. The last assignment we did was also toned paper, but that was you toning your paper with charcoal and then using the eraser to erase out those light values down to the white of the paper. And then I allowed you to use white charcoal on top of it if you couldn't get all of the tone out of the paper. But this one is pre-toned paper, so if you erase down the charcoal, it's gonna give you a mid value instead of a white value. So I suggest starting with a value scale, like I always. And again, you want to use the tone of the paper, not you don't want to mix them. Mix the white and the black to create your mid values. See here how the charcoal or the paper is shining through that black. That's going to almost give me a mid value because it's going to create an optical illusion of a light value shining through the black. So I want to do what I can to get rid of the value of the paper for my darkest areas. This is a blending stump. You can use it to blend out areas and kind of get more details and more blended areas. It's one method of blending. Again, you can use your finger, you can use a Q-tip, you can use a paper towel if you want to blend, you can use paint brushes. So there's a black. Now I want to do a mid-value gray, dark gray. Using a little less pressure as I'm laying this gray down. I might also just let some of that paper shine through if I wanted to. For this one I'm not going to, I don't think. I'm just gonna kind of blend it out a little bit. So if you squint at that, you can see the differences between these two values. That is a black and that is a dark mid-value gray. Again, I'm drawing with less pressure. I'm holding my charcoal pencil at the end or the middle of my pencil. You don't want to hold it kind of like when you're writing, because then you're writing more with your wrist. And you might also apply more pressure that way. This will allow you to apply less pressure as you're drawing. I'm also applying less pressure with my blending stump. I don't actually normally work with the blending stump, but I do want to show you guys different ways to use blending if you need to. So that's almost darker than that. I'm going to erase some of that out. Now I'm not going to use the blending stump as much because I want that paper to start shining through the the dark values to create a lighter optical illusion. So I'm almost using my eraser as more of a blending stump in these areas. And then I want the actual tonality of the paper to be one of my values. And then after that, you'll start fading into a lighter white value. And you can shade with the white the same way. You don't have to just do straight white. You can apply less pressure as you're fading out to a very bright highlight white. Looks like I got some yellow on my, some yellow pastel or something on this white. And I like to use different blending stumps for the white, that way I don't mix so much. You can see I do have black on this one though. I think I mixed my stumps up. Let me see. Here. That way I'm not mixing the black into the white so much. Okay, apply more pressure. When you're applying more pressure, you're actually making the charcoal darker, but it's also just covering up, it's leaving more dust on the paper, so it's covering up that value that we started out with. until you get to the full white. And again, you want less of that texture of the paper and the tonality of the paper shining through. Otherwise, it's going to darken the light value, just like how it lightens the dark value. And then you should have like a nice shift in values, and that's a nice value scale. How many values did we do here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12. So that's a value scale of 12. All right. So definitely start with your value scale so you get used to applying pressure in this kind of way, and you get used to getting that much value, those value differences, by applying pressure, letting the paper, the light of the paper shine through, or the dark of the paper, depending on if you're using a light or a dark charcoal pencil. So when you guys first start your assignment, your macro micro assignments, you want to really think about the composition and how you're going to map out the different ways you're going to create those macro and micro areas in your drawing. So again, macro is whenever you're drawing the entire object in its full form, and you're kind of like taking a small object and drawing it larger. And then micro is whenever you're zooming into an area of an object and you're kind of drawing just that zoom in format, so it gives the abstract illusion. So when you're first starting your drawing, I suggest drawing out your macro areas, so drawing out all your objects first, figuring out where you want them to sit on the picture plane, try and figure out interesting composition, and then also try and figure out where you want your micro elements to sit on the paper amongst your macro elements. That way you know kind of what your generalized composition is going to be when you first start, and you're not going to come into any surprises. For this drawing, I used 2 different types of paper. So here you can see me sketching out a generalized composition of my objects in their entire forms on my picture plane. And then I also am drawing out where I think I want my shapes with my micro zoomed in textures, where I want those to be on my picture plane. When I'm drawing my composition out, I start very, very general, very vague, very loose. I don't really use an eraser when I'm first mapping everything out. I can erase things later. I try and keep everything pretty light. And then once I figure out where I want my objects to be, that's when I will start going in and with the material that I chose and start adding the textures. You can see here that now I'm using a micron pen, and I'm also using a cross-hatching method to give the value and texture of this maple tree. And I'm starting with the dark areas, and I'm kind of working my way over to the light areas. And again, because I'm cross-hatching, I'm kind of going around the form of the tree. That way I'm not using just flat cross-hatching, flat vertical and horizontal lines. I'm kind of making a curve with how the tree curves. That way it kind of gives the object more depth and more volume. In addition to the value, it's also adding more form, linear form. So for this bird's nest, I decided to try out the scumbling effect with graphite pencil, and I'm also using cross-hatching here. So you guys can actually use different techniques on these drawings. You don't have to just stick to one. You can use several techniques on the same object if you wanted to. So you could see that I first started scumbling, and now I'm kind of going back and forth, and I was cross-hatching a little bit, or sorry, just hatching a little bit to kind of give that roundness of the inside of this bird's nest here. I'm just starting out with kind of mid values, dark mid values, and I'm kind of just really quickly scumbling and gesturing in all of those different value shapes. Now I'm going in and I'm hatching a little of the dark shapes out of the inside of the nest. And then I also use my eraser to hatch with. So I go back and forth between scumbling and hatching a lot. Scumbling, you can see, kind of gives it a more of a soft effect, a little bit fuzzy. You can get some interesting textures using the scumbling method, and hatching is more linear. And I'm just building value relationships up on top of one another. For this pine tree, I decided to use ink and a paintbrush. You can also use a calligraphy pen or any type of other inking tools that you may have. I could not find my calligraphy pen to show you guys how to use it, so I decided to use a paintbrush, and I'm actually just using kind of like a basic inking method. I'm mostly doing wet ink on dry paper instead of wet ink on wet paper, or a dry brush on dry paper. So I'm starting with my dark values. You can see that I'm using a rag. I can pick up some of that ink again, and then I'm kind of like pushing and pulling the ink around and pulling some of that dark ink into the lighter areas. If you wanted to, you could also use stippling with a paintbrush and ink. Then I decided to use hatching and also stippling on this milkweed here. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I do not really have the patience to do an entire stippling artwork. I know that some people really love it. That's why I like to show you guys how to do it, because some students will absolutely fall in love with stippling and then just continue making several artworks from it. If I had more time, I would have probably liked to use a lot more stippling in this, but I was kind of on a time restraint as normal. So I also included hatching, and I used these two together to give me the values that I needed. Okay, so last but not least, I figured out the shapes that I wanted early on for my micro zoomed in textured areas on my toned paper. So I traced out a circle using, bottles, objects that had the right proportion of circle that I wanted on my toned paper that I already kind of gestured in on my white paper. And I took a picture zoomed in of my object of a certain textured area that I really liked, and that's where I started to use the white and the black charcoal pencils to create the texture, and I was really focusing on the value shifts in that zoomed in area. For the toned paper drawing, you really want that tone of the paper to be part of the drawing, and you do not want to mix the black and the white charcoal together. That you can do it, but you have to do it for the whole thing. And when you're first learning, I really suggest trying to get used to using the tone of the paper and not mixing the white and the black together. If you are adding the white onto the paper, you really want it to be the actual paper. You don't want it to be on top of charcoal. You do not want to be blending the white and the black together. You want to transition the black into the white like how you did in the value scale. You can use a blending stump to blend things together, or you can keep the paper really rough, showing the texture of the paper through. Here I'm drawing tree bark. And then I did the same thing drawing the bird's nest. And for the last one with the pine trees, I wanted to show you guys a different method of using charcoal. So I have charcoal powder here, and you can either break up your charcoal blocks into charcoal powder, or you could kind of just draw your charcoal on the paper and then kind of use this technique. So you can see that I'm dipping my paintbrush into charcoal powder, and then I'm dipping it into water. And what it's doing is it's kind of dissolving the charcoal powder and making it into, well, it's just making it wet, so then I can push the powder around. I can also just use a paintbrush with the charcoal powder and apply it that way to create really soft value shifts. So instead of using a harsh pencil tip or harsh charcoal block, I'm using a paintbrush, and the paintbrush keeps almost like diffuses the charcoal and keeps it really, really soft, and it kind of like you can spread it out a lot easier, that dust. So you can actually use a charcoal block or pencil and then use a paintbrush on top of it, or you can, and that can even be with dry charcoal, it doesn't have to be wet. But you guys can see here that I kind of was playing around with both methods and both techniques, where I started with the paintbrush. I was just using charcoal powder and a paintbrush, dry charcoal powder, pushing that around, and then I started to wet the paintbrush, and I was using it almost more of a painting method. All right, so at the very end, what you want to do if you're using this method where you're kind of creating your own composition out of several different pieces of paper is you want to cut out the images and collage them together in a way that makes sense for you. So I cut out my toned paper, my micro drawings, the ones that are zoomed in and drawn with charcoal, to just the texture and the zoomed in areas of the objects that I chose. And I cut them out, and I'm now gluing them onto the paper. And I already decided these areas that I wanted them to be in early on, so I already kind of had a basic composition laid out. But what you would want to do at the very end, and if I had time, I'd spend a little bit more time on this drawing, is once you glue those other elements onto the paper that you have, you want to figure out a way to unify the whole piece together, make it feel cohesive, make it feel unified. Because now I'm using toned paper on top of white paper, and I have to think about what that toned paper, adding that tonality onto my white paper and on my drawing, what that does to the overall composition and the unity of the piece. I need to think about the value distribution. Do I need to bring more value shifts into certain areas to distribute the value equally and evenly around the paper to create movement? Am I ignoring any spaces? Are any areas of my drawing too heavy? Do I need to add anything more? Should I take anything away? So these are questions you should be asking yourself at the end. And at this point, you really shouldn't be looking at any other objects or any reference photos. You should just be looking at your drawing and thinking about it as a final drawing, and not how more realistic you can make the objects or anything like that, but how you can make the drawing look its best as a drawing, as a final piece of artwork. So that's all. I hope this gave you guys some clarity for this assignment. If you guys have any other questions, please just let me know. And thank you for watching my video. Bye.